Namaskar, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, students and scholars, teachers and trainers, professors and professionals, listeners, learners, the most honorable present Prime Minister Modi ji, respected ministers and doctors, honorable advocates, advertisers, administrators, advisors, all my dear friends, I Dr. Rakesh, heartily, cordially welcome all of you. It is very nice time, nice place, nice section that we are appreciating our nation in the form of unity in diversity. Today, as we see that we have entered in 2025, what progresses we are doing and how we are measuring ourselves, how we are calculating, evaluating, examining, observing ourselves on the basis of self-analysis, on the basis of self-observation. India's culture, India's civilization, India's different diversities, adversities, varieties can be seen with a different outlook or attitude if we think or imagine we are the son of this holy motherland. What are our rights? What are our duties for our holy motherland? It is to be thought by our all brothers and sisters. Let us go through different ideas and thoughts of the experienced ones. The H1B paradox. The true cost of this talent exodus extends beyond brain drain. It perpetuates an outward force that weakens the urgency for domestic reform, allowing the state to neglect its responsibility to create equitable opportunities and environment conducive to growth and innovation. The question is no longer whether Indians can succeed globally. They clearly can, but why India struggles to replicate this success domestically and equitably. India needs to stop celebrating brain drain as a marker of global success. As India's growth flounders, the lack of a coherent national development strategy is increasingly evident with our global aspirations seemingly relying more on our size than achievements. This is especially clear in the H-1B visa discourse. The India or the Indian government frames H-1B preservation as national interest.
Please charge.
We have an obligation to protect Indian citizens abroad, but why should India actively support the out migration of its best and brightest? This approach supplants a coherent national development strategy for the aspirations of the few, the pride in individual success of a few on the global stage often overshadows the need for systematic reforms that would advance India's place in the world. The H-1B debate in the US is tied to broader immigration issues and colored by economic and racial anxieties. Addressing these concerns is primarily about domestic US politics. For India, the focus should be on why a country producing top talent cannot provide enough opportunities at home, leading to 75% of H-1B holders being Indians. Instead, India celebrates its talent exodus. The success of Indian origin CEOs in Fortune 500 companies and record-breaking remittances become a source of national pride. This narrative of triumph masks deeper structural failure, allowing the government to evade critical introspection and investments needed to broaden opportunities and ensure widespread middle-class success at home. The H-1B system is brain drain. It may help in generating remittances, building global network and enhancing India's soft power. But closer examination reveals a troubling imbalance. India invests heavily in nurturing talent through publicly funded institutions like the IITs without reaping direct benefits from this training, while the US gets to cherry pick our top talent without bearing the cost of training. Indians who go abroad must also trade political equality for economic prosperity. The H-1 narrative has become a story of class privilege, celebrating individual success, obscures systematic barriers, and perpetuates the myth that talent naturally finds success. In reality, structural advantages, access to elite institutions, networks, and resources play a decisive role in determining who gets ahead. Proponents argue that lucrative opportunities abroad through H-1B visas spur education domestically and that brain drain is overstated. This has merit but is incomplete. Relying on external opportunities to drive aspiration effectively outsources the responsibility to build a robust education and employment system While opportunity abroad may spark aspirations, access to quality education remains severely limited, as evident from the intense competition, exam paper leaks, corruption, and youth suicide. Consequently, only a small percentage benefits while the vast majority, particularly in rural and underprivileged communities, are left behind. The true cost of this talent exodus extends beyond brain drain. It perpetuates an outward force that weakens the urgency for domestic reform, allowing the state to neglect its responsibility to create equitable opportunities and an environment conducive to growth and innovation. The question is no longer whether Indians can success globally. They clearly can, but why India struggles to replicate this success domestically and equitable, domestically and equitably. Consider why India, with its abundant talent pool, has produced relatively few globally competitive companies or Nobel laureates. The issue isn't individual capability, but the absence of robust institutional frameworks. Stable governments, transparent regulations, accessible capital, and consistent rule of law. Equally important is an environment that values knowledge and fosters innovation by investing in research and promoting inquiry. These deficiencies stifle domestic innovation and entrepreneurship, leaving India primarily with state-supported national champions or venture-funded copycat services. This gap became particularly apparent in recent discussions about India's absence in the global A1 race. India's real challenge is to transform its aspirational energy into a movement for systematic reform. No country has become a world leader through out-migration of its trained talents, over-indexing on the diaspora for remittances, investments and prestige risk undermining the development of domestic institutions. Instead of celebrating this exodus, India must focus on creating conditions that make staying more attractive than living. This requires a fundamental shift in priorities, improving the quality of education, expanding access to infrastructure, streamlining governance, and fostering an environment conducive to innovation are critical. True Atmanirbharta self-reliance cannot be achieved without universal access to opportunities that enable every Indian to achieve their potential within the country's borders. National progress is not measured by how many citizens succeed abroad or how many billionaires India has, but by how many fulfill their aspirations at home. Award after award after award is power, Margaret Atwood says in his philosophy. A shallow cut out look for inflation growth can provide space for only one more rate cut of 25 basis points in near term. The global environment is mired with inflation risk, one of which stems from tariff-related actions by the US and countermeasures by other countries. The yo-yo on tariff measures has already enhanced financial market volatility and impacted the rupee, which had depreciated over the last few months, even though it has outperformed other emerging market currencies. This raises concerns on account of pass-through to inflation and adverse growth outcomes, which have also been acknowledged by the MPC. The Monetary Policy Committee of the RBI has embarked on a rate cutting cycle in its February 2025 review. The growth, inflation trend and outlook mix had provided a window to cut rates. The committee recently used this opportunity to do the same even as the global arena is fraught with uncertainty, which has manifested most visibly the depreciation in the rupee versus the US dollar. However, while India's rate cut cycle has kicked off, it is highly likely to be shallow. Backtracking to the MPC previous policy meeting in December 2024, the last available CPI Consumer Price Index inflation print had reached 6%, the upper threshold of the medium-term target range of 2 to 6%. This had signaled that rate cut was clearly off the table. Even though GDP growth had slumped to a lower than expected 5.4% in the second quarter of 2024 to 5, the February 2025 policy meeting seemed live for a rate cut, with inflation having receded appreciatively and expected to moderate further in 2025 to 26. Even as the tea leaves of the high frequency indicators portend a pickup in domestic growth from the trough of the second quarter, it is likely to remain well below the level of 8.2% recorded in 2023 to 24. Eventually, the MPC unanimously cut the repo rate by 25 basis points, while maintaining a neutral stance, both in line with our expectations. Interestingly, it was last in April 2019 when the MPC had reduced the policy rate to 6% from 6.25%. While maintaining a neutral stance, this had been, however, followed by the change in stance to accommodative and a series of rate cuts pre and post the onset of the pandemic to the low of 4% by May 2020. In our view, this cycle is likely to be marked different. ICRA believes that the outlook for inflation and growth can provide space for only one more rate cut of 25 basis points in the near term, although the timing of the same needs to be calibrated to the domestic and global developments. We expect the CPI inflation to dip to 4.2% in 2025 to 26 from 4.8% in 24 to 25. In line with the MPC's estimates, this is expected to be driven by a sharp moderation in food inflation. Even as core inflation is expected to rise slightly, the supply-led cooling in food inflation, benefiting from the healthy Rabi showing ample reserve levels as well as the budget's announcement regarding schemes for perishables and pulses is expected to provide relief to low and middle income households. The tax cuts of rupees 1 trillion unveiled by the union budget are generous from a macro point of view. However, the month improvement in disposable income is not large enough to prove inflationary in our assessment. This is especially so. With overall fiscal policy being mildly restrictive, with the fiscal deficit set to narrow to 4.4% of GDP in 2025 to 26 from 4.8% in 2024 to 25. However, the global environment is mired with inflation risk, one of which stems from measures by other countries. The yo-yo on tariff measures has already enhanced financial market volatility and impacted Europe, which has depreciated over the last few months, even though it has outperformed other emerging market currencies. This raises concerns on account of pass-through to inflation and adverse growth outcomes, which have also been acknowledged by the MPC. While global headwinds are likely to adversely impact India's near-term outlook, the muted outlook for exports, particularly for the goods segment, is expected to constrain India's GDP growth over the medium term as well. This would imply that the bulk of the heavy lifting in terms of growth would need to be done by domestic consumption, and that the private capex cycle will likely remain measured and non-exuberant in the absence of strong external demand. Another rate cut in early 2025 to 6 would certainly play an important role in supporting urban consumption and GDP growth in the next fiscal. This would aid in reducing the EMIs of borrowed households, augmenting their discretionary consumption. Although the impact of this may not be significant, it will be spread across a wide number of households as per the RBI data. There were as many as 194.9 million personal loan accounts, including 14.7 million home loan accounts outstanding as of end September 2024. Additionally, the aforesaid income tax relief to the tune of the rupees 1 trillion that was provided in the budget to individual taxpayers would result in a consumption multiplier and has the potential to boost GDP growth in the coming years. This combination of rate cuts, income tax relief, and lowered food inflation is expected to boost urban consumption. In the budget, the government has also provided a capex thrust of rupees 1 trillion, which is a growth of 10.1%. However, over the medium term, government capex is unlikely to grow at very high rates on a sustained basis, owing to fiscal constraints, notwithstanding the shift to the new fiscal anchor, namely debt or GDP, from the more rigid extent fiscal deficit or GDP. Besides fiscal consolidation, will have to contend with challenges owing to the recommendations of the 8th Pay Commission and the 16th Finance Commission, which are scheduled to be released during the coming year. This assessment suggests that India's growth potential remains around the 6.5 to 7% mark, well below the 8% alluded to in the economic survey. Interestingly, the RBI governor stressed that the exchange rate policy remained focused on smoothing excessive and disruptive volatility rather than targeting any specific exchange rate level or band. This suggests policy continuity despite a change in guard at the RBI and debunks the expectations of increased comfort of a depreciation in the US dollar or rupee pair that the market seems to have developed over the last few months. The writer is Chief Economic Head Research and Outreach ICRA. For growth's sake, RBI lowers interest rates as economic momentum slows. Inflation projections suggest space for further easing. On Friday, the RBI's Monetary Policy Committee cut interest rates by 25 basis points, joining the list of central banks across the world would have moved to ease rates. The benchmark repo stands at 6.25%. The decision of the committee, this was the first time the EC had met under the new RBI Governor Sanjay Malhotra, was unanimous. Alongside, the committee voted to continue with the neutral policy stance. The MPC's decision to adopt a less restrictive policy clearly indicates that growth considerations now outweigh concerns over inflation. The momentum in the economy dipped sharply in the second quarter, with GDP growth coming in at 5.4%. The 5.4%, the first advance estimates have pegged growth at 6.4% for the full year. However, the pickup in the second half of the year does not seem to be robust. The RBI has noted early corporate results for Q3 indicate mild recovery in the manufacturing sector. Greater clarity will emerge in the coming weeks and months. The central bank now expects the economy to grow at 6.7% in 2025 to 26. This is at the higher end of the economic survey's projections, which had pegged growth to range between 6.3 to 6.8%. Inflation, however, is now less of a concern, with subdued core inflation and food prices expected to moderate. As per the RBI's latest projections, the consumer price index is projected to come down from 4.8% this year to 4.2% next year. It says that food prices should witness softening due to good kharif production, winter easing in vegetable prices, and favorable rabi crop prospectus. The decision to cut rates comes only days after the central bank announced its plan to inject liquidity into the banking system through open market operations. Variable rate repo actions and dollars or rupees by self-swap occasions. In his comments, the RBI governor said that the central bank would continue to monitor liquidity and financial market predicaments and take appropriate measures to ensure orderly liquidity conditions. As per analysts, this should allow for smoother transmission of rate cuts in the money market. The MPC's decision to lower rates comes after the government cut personal income taxes in the union budget, a measure that is expected to boost household consumption, providing a fillip to the broader economy. The question now is to what extent can the central bank ease policy rates further to support growth. Its inflation projections 4% in the second quarter, 3.8% in the third quarter, 4.2% in the fourth quarter suggests the space for further easing. But the global and domestic environment is challenging. In an uncertain environment, the pressure on the currency is also unlikely to ease. Much will depend on the playing out of the growth-inflation dynamic. Beyond the image, deportation of Indian migrants from the USA is troubling. It speaks of larger issues and predicaments. The deportation of illegal migrants from the US, including from India, is not new. Data shows that hundreds of people have been sent back to India for being in the US illegally every year. It is this context that External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar sought to lay out in the Parliament on Thursday. His task, however, was an inevitable one in the current political movement in both India and the US. Foreign policy is coming under new pressures and is being asked to submit to the test of a performative patriotism. The image of 104 Indians being flown back on a US military aircraft, restrained and shackled, are disturbing, but they must be seen in context. While sympathy for the deportees is understandable, their stories speak to the larger inequality between the within countries, which requires wider conversations, not political point scores. No nation state allows free for all citizens, and illegal immigration has been one of the main issues in the US politics for at least 3 decades. It also an issue that Donald Trump has been especially vocal about on the campaign trail, arguably with racist overtones. The spectacle around the deportation earlier this week can be explained by the Trump administration's desire to address and appease to its political base. That said, similar deportations were undertaken during earlier administrations, both Democrat and Republican. The restraining of passengers has been a part of the US immigration and customs enforcement since November 19, 2012. While such measures may be cause for concern, migration is only one among several issues between India and the US at a time of churn in international relations, including around growing protectionism and talk of tariff and trade barriers. In India, the deportation has evidently provided fodder for an opposition that, since the general election last year, had struggled to find the language to talk to the government and to hold it to account. Partisan politics, however, fails to address the broader and shows that this episode is a symptom of. Across Western democracies, liberal politics has failed to adequately counter an anti-immigrant sentiment that often fails to distinguish between legal immigration legal migration and illegal border crossings, and often conflicts asylum seekers and refugees with criminals amid growing insecurities about the fraying social fabric of host countries. These issues do not have easy answers. Unfortunately, few are even asking the right questions. Pop goes the fluff, a leading publisher's plans to ditch the book blurb is about time. As far as anecdotes go, the blurb, that ubiquitous endorsement of literary merit on book covers that had a rather unpropitious beginning in 1856. The second edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass bore a growing tribute from the philosophers Ralph Waldo Emerson. I greet you at the beginning of a great career. Only it later came to light that it was from a private communication between Emerson and Whitman. The former had no idea that his well-meaning words of encouragement would, without his consent, lend themselves to public seal of approval and launch a marketing trend in which glib testimonies would become advertorial pitches. Seen Manning, publishers of Simon and Schuster's flagship imprint in the US, now seems keen to buck the trend, writing in the Publishers Weekly. He has declared that his authors would no longer be required to indulge in this particular frivolity, as it only perpetuates an incestuous and unmeritocratic literary ecosystem that often rewards connections over talent. It is a brave new word that Manning foresees, since the practice of blurb is now entrenched in the book trade. Coined in 1907 by the American satirist Gillette Bugs, it refers to the effusive, exaggerated, often raucous praise from one's own hype squad, comprising friends and colleagues in high places. Often quid pro quo arrangements, this enforced collegiately has created opaque power structures and insular cliques that further a culture of obligation and favoritism. The transition, the transition may not be as smooth as Manning envisions. The blurb has become pivotal for sailors to position new titles, and the temptations to solicit glowing endorsements from peers is difficult for many writers to resist, unless, of course, like George Orwell, one can cut through the marketing puffery and get to the heart of the matter. In 1936, in an essay in defense of the novel, he wrote, "When all novels are thrust upon you as words of genius, it is quite natural to assume that all of them are tripe. In short, let the book speak for itself." An encompassing budget. an encompassing budget. It will stimulate increased spending, create more jobs and investments. Many Indians look at annual budgets only for relief in direct and indirect tax regime that benefits the middle class. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman did not disappoint them. This time, for years, the FM endured criticism for failing to increase the income tax exemption rate substantially. This year, she announced that incomes up to rupees 12 lakh would be exempt from income tax. The call of country's middle class. This development has been widely applauded. In the short term, the decision is clearly a sound one, especially because more money in the hands of the middle class means more spending. This will catalyze more production and create jobs. Last year, the consumer products market saw a decline in profits. Consumption items like oils and pulses as well as daily use products like soaps and shampoos saw a decline in sales. The reasons for this need detailed study, but on the face of it, it appears that one reason could be the exponential growth of gig economy. Ordering food through delivery aggregators like Swiggy and Zomato rather than cooking at home or visiting one of the mushrooming beauty parlors rather than spending on shampoos and other beauty products have become rampant in the middle class. Globally, the manufacturing industry is a major job provider, but the sector remained an Achilles heel for India. Thanks to the efforts of the Narendra Modi government, growth in the sector has picked up in recent years. According to the annual survey of industries ASI data, the sector experienced 75% growth in final year 2023, taking the number of employed in it to 18.5 million. Any slowdown in the sector would create a challenge to the country's ever-growing employable population. India's country with a massive population of the young, the millions of young people entering the workforce put enormous stress on governments on the job front. As shortages in the traditional jobs sector continue to plague the economy, a large number of youths are in the newly emerging gig sector. Estimates suggest that the gig sector is the fastest growing in India, providing employment to around 10 million people today. ASSOCHAM analysts predict that this fatigue is growing at a compounded rate of 17%, while Niti Aayog is projecting that it will cross 23.5 million by 2029 to 30. There is no clear definition of gig work. It is broadly understood as a work arrangement that is non-permanent outside the traditional definition of employer and employee. The FM seems to have followed to traditional logic that increased tax exemption rates will place excess money in the hands of India's primary consuming class, the middle class, and that will increase domestic consumption. More spending means more tax revenue, more manufacturing, and more jobs. But this time the minister has paid attention to the gig sector too. There has been a long-standing demand from labor organizations for insurance cover for gig workers. Heading Dodge, Sitharaman has announced several social security measures like coverage under the PM Jan Arogya Yojana, aiming to provide health protection to over 10 million gig workers. She may have to keep in mind, though, that leading companies in the gig sector sectors already have certain welfare measures in place for their workers. At a time when digitization all and even threaten to take away jobs, securing capital inflows into the manufacturing sector remains India's biggest challenge. In the last few years, the government has used the infrastructure spending route to boost employment, which continued in this year's budget. It may be a temporary reprieve, but the real answer is to catalyze a greater inflow of domestic and foreign capital into industries with greater employment potential. So far, only the defense manufacturing industry has shown promising growth. Now the government wants to encourage other labor-intensive sectors like shipbuilding, although India depends on oceans for almost 95% of its exports and imports. Its share in the global shipping industry remains minuscule. By granting an industry status to shipbuilding, the FM has opened doors for potential growth in the sector. The most important reform, however, is for regulatory institutions in a successful economy. Regulatory institutions play the role of facilitators. Instead, in India, overzealous regulators made the country less attractive to foreign capital. Recognition this bottleneck, the FM has cautioned that the regulators must keep up with technological innovations and global policy development. She promised a light touch regulatory framework based on principles and trust and announced the constitution of a high-level committee with the objectives of building a modern, flexible, people-friendly and trust-based regulatory framework appropriate for the 21st century. Another far-reaching announcement was of the Jan Vishwas Bill 2.0 in 2023. Through a similar bill, the government decriminalized more than 180 legal provisions in various departments under different ministries. With a view to further enhancing the ease of doing business, the ministers announced the decriminalization of another 100 provisions in various laws. The Chief Economic Advisor to the Finance Ministry, V. Ananda Nageswaram, summarized the mood in the government in his pre-budget economic survey in one sentence: the government should get out of the way of business. Bringing back public trust, journalism must find myriad ways to improve. For starters, embrace fact-checking. Tom Goldstein says President Donald Trump's second term in the office began this month just as his last term ended. Awash in lies, the Washington Post counted an astonishing 30,573 false or misleading claims during Trump's first presidency, an average of 21 daily. In the inaugural remarks of his second term, Trump's unrelenting assault on truth continued. He blatantly repeated wildly inaccurate claims about the economy, immigration and investigations into his own culpability. By stubborn repetition, Trump has shown there is substantial upside and little downside in telling systematic lies. He seems to be as popular as ever, while public opinion continues to devalue the role of the messenger, the news media. beset by diminishing advertising revenues and audiences. The news media is muddling through hard times in order to fulfill its role of holding those in power accountable. The established media must find ways to respond to Trump's allies. To Trump's lies. Over the long term, journalism must find immediate ways to improve. For starters, it needs to recruit a lot more and find better talent. In the near term, it can follow the advice offered by an associate process editor at the start of Trump's first term. Double down on facts. Journalists need to develop new protocols to meet ahead on the erosion of confidence in journalism. As one antidote, as one antidote to the public distrust of the media, journalists need to embrace the art of fact-checking, a term that is often misunderstood or misused. Fact-checking, which sounds so mundane, is not a mere substitute for editing. It is a higher form of editing, far more than checking a story for grammar and spelling. To be sure, fact-checking is time-consuming and expensive. The New Yorker magazine, which sets the gold standard, has nearly 30 journalists checking stories, but it is also a relatively simple way to guard against falsehood. Whether it is written for the web, Facebook, or conventional news outlet, a second skilled person essentially re-reports a story. Once given a draft of a story, a checker does independent research, getting in touch with everyone mentioned in the story. Fact-checking is not perfect. Fact-checking is not perfect. No easy way exists to fully check a breaking news story. Not every assertion can be checked. Of course, Trump's claim after a bullet grazed his ear this summer that he was saved by God goes beyond the realm of checking. When it is needed most, fact-checking on the internet suffered a largely overlooked serious blow earlier this month, dealt by Mark Zuckerberg, chief of Meta and a one-time enthusiastic backer of fact-checking in barely coherent message. That seemed designed to placate then President-elect Trump. Zuckerberg said Facebook and its allied services would abandon fact-checking because it interfered with free speech and expression. No one wants to be accused of stifling, stifling this freedom, but in this instance, accuracy was the victim of this shift in priorities by Zuckerberg. Meta announced that it would end its partnership with independent American journalists to identify false information and hoaxes on its platform. Instead, it would rely on crowdsourcing, sometimes a dubious way of arriving at the truth. Zuckerberg justified his move by arguing that the checking procedures they had put into place produced unwanted censorship, a claim immediately disputed by some of Meta's fact-checking partners. In a statement, dozens of these partners lamented, "We believe that decisions to end Meta's third-party fact-checking program is a step backward for those who want to see an internet that parrots accurate and trustworthy information. We can always hope that a light bulb will flash and Trump will realize that he and other world leaders are really great beneficiaries of quality journalism. Without journalists, he would resemble a playwright with no critics to praise or pen his performances. Rather than treating journalists as a target, he should learn to embrace them and encourage them to improve their products. While waiting for that light beloved moment to drive, journalists might review ideas from the past, some serious, some less so, on how to improve. AJ Liebling, the unparalleled press critic of the last century, told the story of how Albert Camus, once the editor of Combat a resistance newspaper published in Paris during World War II, had hatched a plan to enhance journalism. Camus opposed the creation of a controlled newspaper that would appear one hour after the other with estimates of the percentage of truth in each of their stories along with articles interpreting how the stories may have been slanted. Moreover, Camus wrote, we would have complete dossiers on the interests, policies and idiosyncrasies of the owners, then we would have a dossier on every journalist in the world. The interests, prejudices and quirks of the owner would equal Z. The prejudices, quirks and private interests of the journalist YZ times Y would give you X and the probable amount of truth in the story. Camus never tested his voice, but tongue in check hypothesis, his energy, labeling deadpan was dissipated in creative writing. The great journalistic minds of today need to be focused on ways of restoring trust in journalism. Journalists in Chicago in the last century reduced the quest to a pithy bromide. If your mother says she loves you, check it out indeed. The writer had served as Dean of Journalism Schools at Columbia University in New York, University of California, Berkeley, and the O.P. Jindal Global University, Shonipur. India's A1 movement. India has the necessary foundation to catalyze both the pace and scale of new wave of digital transformation. Just fortnight back, the US committed billions to semiconductor investments with the Stargate initiative laying the groundwork for its technological future. The aim was to create 1 lakh jobs and secure pole position for the US in A1. A1 model emerged in DeepSeek, shaking the foundations of proprietary systems with its unmatched cost, efficiency and performance. DeepSeek developed an open source product in less than 2 years. In another part of the world, an open source A1 model emerged in DeepSeek, shaking the foundation of proprietary system with its unmatched cost efficiency and performance. DeepSeek developed an open source product in less than 2 years with 200 employees and less than $10 million in capital. In comparison, OpenAI boasts 4,500 employees and had $6.6 billion in funding. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, who previously called India's efforts to develop its own A1 models totally hopeless, has made a complete about turn and said that India should take a leadership role in the A1 space. The global A1 race has begun. Each week the world bears witness to groundbreaking innovations that push the boundaries of what we once thought possible. With its young population and a well-established digital public infrastructure (DPI), India needs to rapidly develop capabilities to lead the next phase of the A1 revolution. India has 4,20,000 A1 professionals, a force larger than many nations' entire tech sectors, a 92% A1 adoption rate amongst enterprise, the highest in the world, and a $17 billion market potential. These are the building blocks of a new technological superpower. The government's commitment is unequivocal. Its India A1 mission is a clear declaration of intent. Our development community is the second largest in the world, behind only the US. India has in the world Behind only the US, India has 240 plus general A1 startups, of which 70% cater to industry-specific challenges in sectors such as healthcare, education, BESI, and agriculture. For instance, Sarvam A1 is working on building a foundational model with Indian languages. Nirmay is a head tech startup using A1 to detect early signs of breast cancer in women. BHASHINI. Bhashini is breaking language barriers with built-in support for 22 plus languages to make communication more inclusive. It has already powered over 100 million inferences, providing its widespread use and reliability. With such a vibrant ecosystem of innovation, we have the necessary foundation to categorize both the pace and scale of new wave of a digital transformation. India's story is one of a billion plus people fundamentally reimagining its digital architecture in less than a decade. First, look at what we have achieved in financial inclusion. We took bank account penetration from 30% to over 80% in just 7 years. The World Bank and the IMF shared this should take 47. By rethinking DPI, we cut the cost of opening a bank account from $23 to just 15 cents. Second, examine the scale of digital payments, $568 billion in monthly UPI transactions, with India handling 49% of global real-time payments. More than just the digitalization of existing payments flows, India has created entirely new economic behaviors and possibilities. This infrastructure has created a completely new generation of technology companies. We built close to 108 unicorns in this period, powered by DPI from payments. We moved to healthcare startups using the health stack, lending platforms leveraging the account aggregator framework, and commerce companies building on top of open network. This look at how DPI provided or proved transformative during a crisis. During the pandemic, we could instantly transfer $4.5 billion to 160 million people, from construction workers to farmers, from women to rural workers. India facilitated direct, instant, and leakages-free transfers when they needed it most. On this open source interoperable infrastructure, we created an ecosystem that allows both public and private innovation to flourish. The results speak for themselves. 14 million business registered on GST, 863 million internet users, and an expected 13.42% digital economy growth rate. With a globally recognized talent pool, relatively low electricity cost, abundant land, a vast reservoir of data, and strong government support for an aspirational entrepreneurial vision, we should lead this race. A foundation pillar of the A1 ecosystem that demands urgent attention is hardware. GPUs are the brain of A1 and the key pillar on which machine intelligence is built. The Biden administration, in one of its last orders, issued the A1 diffusion rule, thereby putting severe control and restrictions on the import and export of GPU computing facilities. Despite India being a Quid partner, the US put it under the Tier 2 category, restricting the import of advanced GPUs as well as large-scale training of frontier A1 models. This places a severe handicap on India's ability to develop and grow as one A1 power. India must take decisive steps to build and fortify the hardware backbone powering A1 system, ensuring that they deliver unmatched efficiency, reliability, and scalability. Owning our A1 hardware capabilities is a necessity for securing independence in an increasingly tech-driven world. Investments in A1 hardware will create jobs and attract significant capital while also sparking a ripple effect of innovation across industries. By developing robust hardware ecosystem, India can position itself as an indispensable partner in global supply chains, amplifying its influence on the international stage, nurturing cutting edge research and cultivating homegrown expertise will unlock breakthrough that solidify India's leadership in A1 hardware innovation. Finally, championing open hardware ecosystems will foster collaboration and inclusivity, ensuring accessibility for innovators and developers around the world. To lead the A1 revolution, we must understand this truth. Hardware is more than an accessory, it is the engine driving it all. To maintain our sovereignty in the technological advancement and lead from the front, we must not allow ourselves to become a technological colony of the US and China. This requires us to do the following one. India must innovate in a nimble, less energy consuming, cost effective manner. We must do more less like ISRO. The open source is the way forward, but we must create an environment that encourages brilliant and clever engineering. We must converge software with computing power to achieve solutions for pressing challenges like improving learning and health outcomes at the lowest cost. Three, we must build sovereign frontier models that are based on our data assets, do not have any inherent biases. It should be an end-to-end A1 ecosystem and not just the application layer. For since India has 22 recognized official languages and a vast number of local dialects, we must build multilingual and multi-model. Foundational model 5 as a Quad partner, India should secure its position among Tier 1 countries in the realm of A1 diffusion and not be subjected to any restriction or control. 6. There must be a sense of great urgency and a mission driven approach when future generations write the history of A1. They must mark this decade as the moment when India transformed from service provider to a global innovator. US decision on G20 message for ICJ diplomacy test for India. Expert explains US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said on Thursday that he would not attend the G20 foreign ministers meeting in Johannesburg because South Africa is doing very bad things. President Donald Trump has declared that South Africa is confiscating land and threatening certain classes of people very badly. Neither Trump nor Rubio have provided details, so what has provoked the attack on South Africa. ICJ case against Israel, Rubio's post on Exxon can be understood in the context of South Africa's ongoing genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice ICJ. As international support for the case has increased, so has the tussle between South Africa and its allies and Israel and American public figures such as Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who have sought to undermine the ICJ. On January 31, South Africa and Malaysia announced a campaign to to protect the rulings of the ICJ and International Criminal Court in the face of alleged attempts by US Congress to hit the ICC through the use of sanctions. A nine-nation news group was formed under South Africa's leadership to defend the rights of Palestinians and to coordinate against violations of international law by Israel, targeting Hague courts. The first Trump administration 2017 to 21 imposed sweeping sanctions on the ICC and its officials, a decision that was reversed by the Joe Biden administration, which supported the ICC investigation into Russian war crimes in Ukraine. However, this support suffered after the ICC said it would seek arrest warrants against the leader of both Israel and Hamas. Soon after Trump's re-election, Israel's ambassadors to the Danny Don said that the outcome parents an opportunity to neutralize the cases against Israel in the International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice. The ICC and ICJ are both international tribunals seated in The Hague, Netherlands. The ICC, established pursuant to the Rome Statute of 22, has the jurisdiction to prosecute individuals for serious international crimes such as genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. The ICJ is an organ of the United Nations that hears disputes between states. G20's uncertain future. Rubio's tweet, while aimed more at South Africa, the current president of G20 raises questions about the Trump administration's commitment to the multilateral organization itself. The G20 foreign ministers meeting is scheduled for February 2021 and the leaders summit for November 2023. During his first term, Trump pushed his America First policies strongly at G20, which led to both contestations and isolations on many issues. He was successful in altering in 2017 the emphasis of G20 from free trade to reciprocal trade, aligning with his views on international trade and his imminent trade war against China. With his more radical and aggressive agenda, it is not certain that Trump 2.0 will necessarily value the role of G20 and will work towards building relationships of cooperation and support within the grouping. View from New Delhi. In recent years, India has conveyed that groupings such as G20 may be more suitable than organizations such as the UN for solving complex global challenges. India's own pivot towards leadership of the Global South has benefited significantly from the rising status of G20 and from India's own position within the grouping in recent years. For India, the UN Security Council represents an outdated system based on the interest of the victors of World War II. The G20, on the other hand, gave emerging economies a greater say in matter of global governance. It was tailor-made for a rising India, given US objectives relating to the Russia-Ukraine war and the rivalry with China. The Biden White House was fully supportive of New Delhi's G20 presidency in 2023 and of its leadership of the Global South. This enabled India to present itself as a uniquely positioned consensus-driving bridge between the Global North and Global South with relationships of trust on both sides. The policy priorities of Trump 2.0 appear markedly different from that of the Biden administration. This is where the acrimony between the US and South Africa could have anticipated implications for the G20. In the worst case scenario of the US either skipping G20 in South Africa or pulling out altogether, the grouping would be unquestionably weakened. More worryingly, it could come under greater Russo-Chinese sway and influence, but Rubio's tweet could also be an opening US salvo meant to prepare the ground for subsequent negotiations and compromises. In this scenario, South Africa would be expected to show a more conciliatory approach in exchange for American goodwill. If so, the negative implications both for G20 and for India's interest in it would be less serious. For India, there would be another concern: the Trump administration's ambivalence, if not antipathy, towards the Global South could complicate India's Global South related diplomacy. India's bridging power remains silent when the US-led West perceived such as a role favorably, but under a transactional leadership and administration, India's role and value as a leader of the Global South may not necessarily be apparent to the White House. India's challenge will be to make the right choices as the US, its strategic partner, lock horns with its traditional fences in the Global South with uncertain bargains and outcomes. How the climate crisis intensifying marine heat waves. India's repositioning on climate. How thank you, brothers and sisters. Thanks, all of you.